I offer this podcast freely. Your support really makes a difference. To make a donation, visit reneemckenna.com. Welcome to Spiritual Psychology. My name's Renee LaValle McKenna, and I bring my 30-plus years as a recovering addict and ex-crazy person turned therapist and shamanic healer to bring you snackable teachings on spirituality, psychology, and all things personal growth. And today I want to talk about nature spirits, or the spirit of nature. We are all children of nature and children of God, or the goddess, or maybe more accurately, God and the goddess, which I have come to see as my spiritual family or my spiritual parents. And I think it's both a tragedy and a travesty that most organized religion only refers to God as masculine, because the creative force, the larger consciousness system, needs both masculine and feminine on this plane of existence in order to create and procreate. And I'm not going to go off on the patriarchy and the woman-fearing, misogynist structures that created this unwise and incomplete belief structure. Well, maybe I will a little bit. But I think it's more important to just actually be with what is true, which is that we do live on a plane of duality, of pairs of opposites, or perhaps more accurately, pairs of complements that provide a creative opportunity and a dynamic interplay that moves the life force and evolution forward. And for probably a whole bunch of complicated reasons, including tremendous ego, humans have been trying to separate themselves from nature, particularly in the Judeo-Christian traditions, and that's really supported by the Bible. Very early in Genesis gives us dominion over the earth. In Genesis 1:27, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. And God blessed them, and God said unto them, be fruitful and multiply, and replenish the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth. And I'm fascinated by Genesis because I think it really contains very deep mystical wisdom. But I think this particular line has set in motion an entire perspective on our relationship with nature and the earth that we're really being called to revisit right now. And I personally think dominion is bad, having been a really dominant, abusive person at different points in my life, and that interdependence is a much wiser, more evolved way of operating in pretty much every area of our life. But as we evolve as a species, it does make sense. Even in our own life, we move from the dependency of early childhood and infancy into a place of independence in adolescence and early adulthood. And optimally, we move into interdependence in partnership, in community and family, and hopefully even in our professional lives as we grow and mature. And I suppose that is probably an endless cycle that at the end of our life, we move back into dependency in old age and infirmity and ultimately death, where we are once again dependent upon the larger system to move us to the next place. Because of the fractal nature of reality, what's happening on the microcosm is also happening on the macrocosm. And so as a species, we are moving from dependence, we're in a phase of independence, and ultimately learning about interdependence. And there's this really interesting information called the Law of One, and the Book of Ra was channeled information that came in the 80s. It's pretty dense. And there's this really cute underwear model, Aaron Abke, who has a great YouTube channel that really distills it down. And he's good to look at while he's talking and kind of decoding this really profound information about the meta-evolution of the soul. And the Law of One talks about densities. Now, these are massive evolutionary experiences on a consciousness plane. And the first density is unified consciousness. And from the Law of One perspective, nature would be seen as first density. Rocks, water, plants, the sun, They have no agenda of their own. They operate as a unified system, and from a law of one perspective, that level of consciousness is seen as perhaps fairly unconscious. I don't necessarily agree with that. I'll talk about that more later. But the consciousness of the elements of nature certainly operates without any personal agenda. There is no ego in a tree, at least that I've come across. And the second density in the law of one, which is again about the evolution of consciousness, is the beginning of a sense of self and separate identity. And second density would be the more highly evolved animals, particularly mammals, though certainly some kinds of birds, and particularly pets that we give a name and often anthropomorphize, make them like humans in our own minds. And that has an effect on those creatures. They begin to get a sense of a self-identity. And then third density is where humans are, and we have our own experience as an individuated unit of consciousness. And each density has its own evolutionary dynamic that it's grappling with. And third density, the driving issue, according to the law of one, is psychological suffering. I know that's been true for me. And that psychological suffering either drives us forward to our own growth and greater maturity, or it drives us crazy, puts us back into the system in the karmic wheel until we grow or learn or develop and evolve into fourth density. Now, this takes many, many cycles, perhaps many lifetimes. And fourth density incarnation, according to Ra, is what they call a social memory complex, that the individual units of consciousness in third density begin to gather or clump together into these larger groups that hold both their individual consciousness and access to the consciousness of all of the other entities within that social memory complex. It's a leap toward unified consciousness. And Ra itself reports that it is a fifth density social memory complex. I think of about 200 units of consciousness that speak as one. And it's the idea that the unification of many parts is actually greater than the sum of the parts. So the consciousness of a social memory complex is much greater than if you just added up the 200 individual units. I think it might be more like developing a laser beam as opposed to just having a bunch of light bulbs. And I have to tell you, when I heard that, we're moving from third density of being individuals into fourth density and a more unified consciousness, it felt completely true to me. And if I look at what's happening, particularly in technology, it is the direction that we're going. I had the great fortune to live before cell phones and now having cell phones and the ability to instantly communicate with people all over the world. I can track where my children are at any moment, much to their dismay. And I can watch them moving around live wherever they are on the little map. You know, I had an opportunity to go to the Soviet Union when it was still the Soviet Union in 1991. And I had a little boyfriend there, a married Russian mafioso. That's a whole story in itself. But anyway, in order to contact him, I had to write a letter. And then I had to find someone to translate it into Russian because, of course, he didn't speak English. And I had the Russian skills of about a 2-year-old. And then the translated letter needed to be faxed. And then he would have to go pick up the fax. And we could try to send letters to each other, but I'll tell you, the postal service in the old Soviet Union was not very good. And that kind of communication took days or even weeks. And I have a client in Vladivostok in far eastern Russia now. And we can message each other instantly on WhatsApp and talk live on Zoom as easily as if she was next door. Except there's a tremendous time difference, which we have to navigate and figure out. But to me, all the ways that we can instant message and talk live to each other is a move toward fourth density. That what we're doing with artificial intelligence is our own rudimentary attempts at unifying consciousness on this larger scale. And I have to tell you, for myself, it really gave me tremendous faith in humanity and the direction we're going. And I'm much more interested in participating in the evolutionary flow of the life force that humanity is a part of than the idea of survival as a species. There really is no such thing as survival. Everything's impermanent and ever-changing. And the more we can learn about, commune with, align ourselves with this evolutionary flow, the more interesting, fulfilling, and exciting life is. And the theme of my entire life seems to be one of growing in greater and greater trust of the process. Not trust of humanity, but trust of the larger process that underlies all of the life force. So if you're interested about learning more about the Book of Ra and the Law of One, there's tons of free information online. And I'm going to go back to this first density of the elements of nature. And from an intellectual perspective, trees and wind and moon certainly may seem unconscious, the intellect being our more masculine perspective. But when we open to our more intuitive, non-rational, body-felt, or relational ways of knowing, our feminine approach or perspective, I have found nature to be the most easily accessible place or way to experience spirit, God, the transpersonal directly. And most of us are suffering greatly from this disconnection with nature, particularly the way that modern life is set up, where we live in our little box, looking at our little screen. We get in another box with wheels and drive to another box, maybe to look at another screen. We often spend very little time outside in the elements or in nature, and might spend days or weeks or even months without our feet actually touching the bare earth. Now, we're interacting with consciousness and elements all the time. We drink and bathe and consume water. We're breathing air in and out every moment. We are held to the earth with gravity. And unless your box has no windows, which would be really terrible, the day and night cycles of the rising and falling of the sun certainly impact our rhythms and probably our mood. But connecting with nature more deeply, more intentionally and consciously is incredibly beneficial and a spiritual practice in its own right. And it doesn't have to take a ton of time. It's very interesting. I just moved to Manhattan, and I have been more connected with nature in the largest city in our country than I have in years. For the first time in my adult life, I'm not driving a truck or a car. And if I want to get anywhere in the Upper West Side, I need to walk or take a bike. They have this amazing city bike system, which I'm having so much fun with. Not quite sure what's going to happen in the winter. We'll see. But I'm outside for extended periods of time, and I live in between Riverside Park on the west side and Central Park to my east. They're both just a couple blocks away, and almost every day I am making time to sit with the water, with the earth, and with the trees. And there's tremendous energy in this city. You can just feel the flow. You can see the flow of the people out on the street. I've been sitting out on my fire escape having lunch. I love being outside. And I have to tell you, I lived in San Francisco for many years, and it was too cold to sit outside a lot of the times in the neighborhood that I lived out at Ocean Beach. And I can't tell you how happy I have been to be warm. I haven't worn a coat in a month. And there's a greatly kept secret in San Francisco that it's fucking freezing cold in the summertime. I grew up with Four Seasons in Boston, and I am thrilled to be back in Four Seasons once again. And those seasonal cycles have been a tremendous teacher for me, to watch the trees lose their leaves, go into the seeming death and what looks like a lifeless cycle of winter, and to come out the other side and to bloom again with flowers and leaves and fruit. And those ripen and mature and fall away, and the cycle begins again. Something tremendously comforting and wise about that we are part of that cycle, and that those cycles can instruct us not just for our whole life cycle of birth and maturation, hopefully fruiting, and then death, which begins again as we transition into the next place on a soul level, but on the microcosm, how important it is to live deeply and participate in whatever part of the cycle that we're in. There are times to let go of things, to be quiet, and there are times to bloom and fruit and flower and grow. And we can trust those cycles. Modern culture is obsessed with perpetual growth. Perpetual growth is actually unhealthy. Cancer is perpetual growth, unchecked. And we can look at our problems with overpopulation, with garbage, with resource management that has lost faith or connection or trust with these more feminine cycles. We're terrified of death, desperately attached to our material stuff, to our money, to how we think things should be. And I want to tell you that it is safe to let go. We are part of a larger system that has our highest good in mind. Grappling with the impermanence of our own little ego and personality self that will die is part of that psychological suffering that drives our maturation here. Because we are part of something greater than ourselves. And there are aspects of us that are connected with the infinite. And outgrowing that fear is, I think, some of the deepest work that we do. And I think the great wound of all humanity is our experience of disconnection and the fear and the confusion that creates. That we are seemingly separate from nature. And yet, if we look deeply, we are not. We are in a state of interbeing, as the Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh coined that phrase. We inter-are. Try not breathing for a few minutes or not drinking water. You won't last very long. We really are children of nature. Our bodies are 50 to 60% water, and the rest of our form is made up of the same minerals and compounds that makes up all of creation. Again, we are breathing the air in and out. It nourishes every one of our cells every moment. And the fire of the sun, the reflection of the moon could be seen as our own spirit or life energy. And there's a difference between just being outside and actually communing with the spirit of nature. And although it's nice to be outside running or walking or biking, but if you got your earbuds on and you're thinking about something else while you're there, only your physical body is present. When we bring our consciousness, our relationality, our felt experience into the elements of nature, a whole different thing happens. And it doesn't even have to take a lot of time. To take a moment and sit on the earth, to touch a tree, to really feel the sun absorbing into your skin, or the moonlight reflecting upon you. There was a full moon last night. I'm a moon person more than a sun person. And the moon has always felt like a mother to me. And to sit a moment and observe the moon and open to the possibility that as I am aware of the moon is aware of me. To touch or go into water, particularly in a natural setting, the river or pond or the ocean. And again, open to the possibility that as I am aware of the water is aware of me. Intellectually, rationally, that makes no sense. But when we open to our more body-felt, emotional or relational ways of sensing, feeling, experiencing, a whole different thing happens. To really feel that we are held to the earth with gravity. The earth hugs us to her, that our own body is composed of earth, wind, rain, and sun, that those elements form and reform themselves in the food we eat, in our experience of other humans, creatures and places and spaces, that everything on this plane of existence is made of consciousness, not just nature, the chair I'm sitting on, the walls of this room, the clothing I wear. On the deepest level, everything is imbued with life force on the atomic level, forming and dissolving and reforming itself again in an infinite dance of creativity. And when we can open ourselves or let go of our limiting narratives and ideas of who we think we are, and open to this more transpersonal way of experiencing life, to feeling rather than thinking, we really are children of consciousness, children of nature. We are an important part, an intrinsic part of something much larger than ourselves. And this isn't an idea to be grappled with. This is a felt experience to be had. In the intellect, our narrative about ourselves and about life is the more masculine perspective or part of ourselves. And the experience, the body-felt wisdom, is the feminine part. And we do need to blend those together to have them interplay with each other, that our experience can change our narrative, and vice versa. And that masculine-feminine balance within each of us holds the seeds of our own evolution in our own co-creativity with this larger system that we're a part of. And from my perspective, the masculine and feminine on the larger consciousness scale is available to help and instruct us as well. That the masculine are the principles, the structures, the laws of nature, which modern science really helps us to understand. There's a great intelligence underlying all things. The universe is not random, and that those laws or principles like gravity and metabolism and the systems of water flowing across our planet in all its different cycles all point to this intelligent, unified system, which is the more masculine aspect of God. And then the goddess, the feminine, is the manifestation in form, in our capacity to have felt relational experience of it, and the interplay between principles or natural laws and the form of nature itself, and our own individual interplay of our intellect and our intuition, of our rational mind and our body felt experience. That's the cutting edge of life. That's our experience in the present moment. And I've come to rely heavily on shamanic practices like inner journey work as just the most simple and accessible pathways to connect with the spirit of nature and the larger consciousness system that I've come across. And if you would like to make direct contact with nature and learn about these really simple and accessible practices of inner journey work, I'm doing a couple of free masterclasses on becoming your own shaman, and we're re-releasing our digital courses on individual shamanic practice, become your own shaman, connect with the lower world and the upper world, the spirit of nature directly for your own growth, healing, personal guidance, and empowerment. You can find out more in the show notes, and I encourage you to check those out. Come out of your intellect and have an experience. That's where things really change. We act our way into right thinking rather than thinking our way into right action. Thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to book a block of sessions with me, find out more how this work might benefit you in your life, or learn about my mentorship program, shoot me an email, info@reneemckenna.com. You can DM me on Instagram @ReneeLaValleyMcKenna. Thanks as always to my generous supporters on Patreon. Blessings on your path until we meet again. This is Renee LaValley McKenna for Spiritual Psychology.